In any case, Maxim Lott knows a lot more than you or I do, probably, on this subject and many others. He's one of Fox News' best producers. He's also a writer for FoxNews.com. Maxim, welcome to Chicago. Pardon my out-of-breathness. I had an alarm on the other side of the studio, and I had to go grab something out of a printer that was halfway across the WCGO building up here. So thank you for bearing with me, and welcome to Chicago. I believe this is your first interview here.
Yes. Thank you, Franklin. Good to be on. So this story, basically, the Smith College president, Kathleen McCartney, she sent out a campus-wide email, and she was supporting the protests over Ferguson. But her subject headline was All Lives Matter, which you would think wouldn't be a controversial statement. But many students actually got outraged about this. They said, All Lives Matter is the wrong phrase. The politically correct, approved phrase is Black Lives Matter. And they said, focusing on All Lives Matter, one student said it felt like she was invalidating the experience of Black lives. Another said, yes, all lives do matter, but it's not all lives that are being targeted for police violence. So the president...
Here you have a college president. Let's see, Kathleen McCartney. She evidently, college presidents make a lot of money, first and foremost. It is one of the most prestigious jobs in the United States. And Smith, I guess, is deemed as one of the seven sisters, a great college. Here right. She must have had a very successful career, yes?
It is a prestigious college. People like Nancy Reagan went there, Julia Childs, Gloria Steinem, so they're famous people who went there.
Yeah, but that was a different generation, really, if you don't mind my saying, because I went to Yale, and that has changed so much now that the other schools admit women. In the old days, girls would go to Smith or Wellesley, or in the South, they'd go to Randolph-Macon Women's College, for instance, in order to go to dances with the guys who are going to Yale and Harvard and Vanderbilt. And times have changed somewhat, but they're still good schools. I wonder if this isn't if it isn't just sort of embarrassing for her personally. I'd be embarrassed had I deigned to dip my toes into this business and stop going about the business of running the college as best I could. It's largely a financial job. And then get into this ridiculous mess, and then to do it wrong after all, and then to concede, and say, I'm sorry. She says, we are united in our insistence that all lives matter, which was incorrect, right? And then she went on about apologizing. I mean, doesn't it sort of make you feel dirty?
Right. I mean, most people at Smith, I think, are behind the president, and they say she was right to apologize. That's the atmosphere on campuses. But one professor I talked to said, I worry that this whole situation will make people even more fearful of speaking honestly about race. They'll say, I just don't want to be the subject of a witch hunt of people saying, you have to retract this because you didn't phrase it exactly correct.
Well, I think you just can't talk about race. I had this conversation the other day with a broadcaster, and I said, we've got to be very, very smart these days, frankly, to dance on this issue, because race is an important issue. And the minute we stop talking about it, we're in a lot of trouble, really, as Americans, because we have an issue that all of a sudden we can't touch for fear of being completely politically correct. But we're very close, perhaps closer than we've ever been, to simply being called racist for talking about these cases. I mean, as a white man, I have this terrible CPU running in the back of my brain saying, I can't talk about the Wilson case. I mean, for instance, I learned the other day, we learned from a New York police detective, Coach Kevin Collins, that there was a reason 5 guys were on Mr. Wilson in New York, and that was because he was a career criminal with multiple charges against him and multiple convictions and many hidden convictions. They hide some of them because they don't want you to know everything about the life of a career perp. And so they had 5 guys on him expecting that he would resist arrest. And of course he did resist arrest. And I'm telling the truth of the story from a police detective who also reports that the captain in charge is black and the head of the precinct is black, and that Wilson's own family said this had nothing to do with his skin color. They knew he was a pretty bad guy, I guess. When I say bad, here's my CPU going crazy. I mean, he is a criminal, and the cops know him as a criminal in that precinct. But one second guesses oneself, and I guess as a Fox News producer, you deal with these questions too, don't you? I mean, how do you touch race on these issues without just doing what you're told to do, which is to lie down on the ground and say hands up, don't shoot, and I guess join the fray of protests.
Right,
and
that's
stop
a good
reporting.
question. I suppose as long as you stick with the facts, you don't get in too much trouble. Now, what's interesting is how all this is perceived on campuses, because you have not just the Smith case, but there have been a lot of others recently. With Columbia Law School, which is another prestigious law school, they recently said if you want to postpone your final exam and you've had emotional trauma as a result of reading or hearing about these police shootings in the news, you can postpone the exam. Law professors are saying, come on, how can you be an effective lawyer if you experience emotional trauma at hearing, news stories?
Can I get my emotional support dog to take my Columbia final exam for me?
That's a good question.
That's what I'd like. Yes.
Yeah, and the Smith story, people who follow these happenings on campus say this is really just indicative of a broader trend where we have the University of Hawaii recently tried to prohibit students from handing out the U.S. Constitution. They said you can't do it on 95% of campus. You can only do it in this one little free speech zone. And the students sued. There's this group, FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, that takes these cases to court. They sued. They won. Now you're allowed to hand out constitutions on University of Hawaii campus. But it just shows the mindset on campus is far left and moving even further. There was an interesting survey done by UCLA researchers. They found that 9% of public university professors admitted to being conservative.
Maxim, can you explain the Constitution thing for me a little better? I don't understand the story. I cannot wrap my head around it.
Right.
Would you zoom out for our listeners and tell us what exactly happened in Hawaii and how it is evil or un-American to share the good news of the Constitution
right.
of the United States?
So what the university would say is we just have a policy of, you can't hand out any literature on most of the campus because we want to protect our students from getting offensive material or being bothered on their way to class. So you can't hand out anything. It doesn't matter if it's the Constitution or the Koran or the Bible. But other people say, we have free speech in this country. If I want to hand out the Constitution or anything, I should be able to do that. And, especially you would think a founding document that, enshrines freedom of speech. But they said, no, you're absolutely not allowed to do that. And in court, they lost. They had to settle because you do still have freedom of speech on a public university campus to hand out what you want. But, yeah, their motivation, they'll say we're just trying to, avoid nuisances. But others will say, well, maybe they actually don't really want people reading the Constitution.
Right. These events, and in particular the business of the constitutional ban, and soon it will be un-American. Needless to say, the Constitution will be deemed un-American by activists. It is so delightfully Orwellian as to be almost unbelievable. I never would have thought that he would have been so right, that these crazy things one reads as a boy when one reads 1984 for the first time, you say, I can't believe this. How can you have a government whose founding principles are, truth is lies, freedom is slavery, liberty is slavery, right? All this double think that we learn about in 1984 that is part of a new neo-fascist, Democrat, socialist, frankly, Nazist world that is wrought, of course, from this from the creation of warring factions. There's an aspect of 1984 that I never really understood, and I'm still just beginning to understand. And that's what we learn with Emmanuel Goldstein and the necessity of the 3 Minutes of Hate or something. Do you remember the book?
I do.
And what they do is they got all the citizens together in front of a television of some kind, and everybody hates the person on TV. And that's how they keep Oceania and Eurasia at war. And it's the best way to keep the people in check, right, is to give them the feeling constantly that they must hate something. And, that's what I see with this race business. I see it everywhere I go. I see a manufactured division which isn't there in my heart, my life, among my neighbors, in my household, or even really in our street. I see tragedy. We see the tragedy of criminality and poverty and child abuse and prostitution and molestation and all these terrible things. But the racism seems to be foisted upon us as a mechanism, perhaps, to keep us in control. And I see no better example of that than I do when I see hard left fascist activists taking away our written guarantee of freedom. Of course, it's not our guarantor of freedom, but our written guarantee of freedom of speech and expression on college campuses, of all places.
Yeah. And one interesting thing is, in the Smith case, it's kind of the left attacking the left. They're almost jumping over themselves to find the kind of the most politically correct possible thing. Because you would think, all lives matter. That's an anti-racist sentiment. The opposite of racism, to say all lives are equally valuable, which I think everyone agrees with. But yeah, you get in trouble for saying that.
It's happening, of course, in the Middle East. It happens with Israel. Here we have the most tolerant society that has ever existed in the Middle East. It's just plain extraordinary. Blacks, Christians, whites, Arabs, Jews, Muslims, all living together in this country. Homosexuals walking down the street, making out on the beach in Tel Aviv. 2 boys, 2 girls, everywhere you go. Women driving, and just everything is unlike anywhere else in the Middle East. And yet here we see the Jews as intolerant, racist, and their tiny little minuscule corner of the world must be defeated. It must be destroyed because it's a symbol of all that is wrong. We must absolutely hate them so that we may be free under the bright red banner of what? What?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I mean, who are these people?
And as I'm sure you're aware, campus political correctness extends to that stuff too. Like last year, I covered a case where a California public university professor had his students read that Al-Qaeda is fighting for freedom against the neo-colonial power of the U.S.
Right, of course. Maxim Lott, producer, Fox News. Maxim, please give my best to Shayna and Jody and Christy and Griff and my other old friends from Radio America out there at Fox. And keep doing the good job you guys are doing. It's noticed in the ratings. You've absolutely creamed everybody in the sphere of media just from good reporting and good hearts, clean minds. I appreciate it. Fox News is doing a great job. Maxim Lott, Fox News producer, right here on 1590 WCGO, Chicago's New Talk, broadcasting from the WCGO Tower in downtown Chicago. Be back in a minute.